Welcome to the Holocaust Museum and Cohen Education Center's virtual luncheon. I'm Susan Suarez, President and CEO of the museum. Wherever you are joining us from today, we're glad you're here. Coming up, we will share a little-known story of courage and heroism from the Holocaust and show you how the museum is continuing to inspire action against bigotry, hatred, and violence through our online programs and new procedures at the museum. We are so grateful to our sponsors and every person who has made a contribution to the museum this year. With very little income from admissions, donations are more important than ever to keep our education programs strong. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome all of you to our annual Holocaust Museum and Cohen Education Center luncheon. I would certainly prefer that we all be together at the Ritz-Carlton enjoying a wonderful lunch and having the opportunity to see and talk with each other. However, there is one benefit to this new and hopefully temporary format. We won't have to stand outside and wait 30 minutes or more for our cars following the program. The program this year, again, highlights someone who lived amongst us and had goodness in their heart and exemplified the best of the human spirit. We need more people in this world with the moral compass and humanity of Jose Arturos Castellanos, whose story you will hear more about shortly. I want to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of the luncheon and all of our donors who have supported the museum in this event. As a result of your philanthropy, our museum can continue to help educate students about the lessons of the Holocaust, to inspire them to take action against bigotry, hatred, and violence, so they can make a difference in the greater Naples community and beyond. Now, I invite you to sit back and enjoy our inspiring program.
November the 10th, 2019, and the ribbon is cut on the new home for the Holocaust Museum and Cohen Education Center. It was the realization of a long-held dream to own our own building, and nearly 1,000 people turned up to the dedication ceremony to hear about what they would see in the new facility. While we are thrilled to have larger exhibition spaces, arresting lighting and professional display cases, and multimedia technology to tell the story of the Holocaust, the museum never forgets its roots as a classroom project at Golden Gate Middle School. As an organization created by students, we continue to keep students at the center of our education focus. This past year, the museum has been filled with students touring the exhibits, learning the history and lessons of the Holocaust, reading about our survivors and their experiences during the war, and taking a tour with one of our education staff, many of whom are volunteers with special and personal insights into aspects of the Holocaust. They also take part in classroom activities designed to enlarge upon the roles of upstanders and the importance of doing the right thing, and by learning about the men and women who risked everything to help Jews and persecuted people, either by rescue or resistance, reinforce the importance of empathy, moral courage, and mutual respect. After their tours, which often ended at our boxcar, Teachers ask students to reflect on what they have seen, often through artwork like this. The museum welcomes visitors from Southwest Florida and around the world. Docents and educators are thrilled to be able to teach the lessons of the Holocaust to inspire action against bigotry, hatred, and violence. Groups and individuals come from Naples, Florida to Naples, Italy, Paris, Texas to Paris, France, London, England to London, Ontario, and their positive reviews have put us in TripAdvisor's top 10 of things to do in Naples. Learning continues with lectures, films, and special programs. Heroes, Heroines, and Helpers is the exhibit planned for 2021 and continuing the story of the upstanders. We partner with Jen Shoa of Southwest Florida in their rolling program of films, events, and talks, and Movies That Matter has taken off virtually in spite of COVID-19. Students and adults are now participating in new ways, either safely in person at the museum through timed tickets and social distancing, and school groups, though now much smaller, sticking to safety guidelines we've all come to know and follow. Away from the museum, we are extending our reach with our pop-up museums, and films and discussions are now being conducted online with platforms like Zoom, Skype, and Google Meet. Your gifts and support make this education possible. We do not charge for our programs. We pay for field trip buses and books and supplies for classroom activities.
After France was invaded by the Nazis, the country was cut in two. My mother's oldest sister and her husband were already in the free zone south of France and wanted my parents to join them, which they did. They settled in Clermont-Ferrand, the capital of the province of Auvergne. After a while, they sent me on a farm about 35 kilometers southeast of Paris with the Chassin family in the village of Estendeuil. The Chassin family already had 6 children, and I literally became their 7th child. I had my chores to do, I went to school, I went to church, and I stayed with them for 3.5 years until the summer of 1945, when my aunt brought me back to Paris along with another orphaned nephew. I obtained for the Chassin family posthumously the title of Righteous Among Nations by Yad Vashem in Israel. I applaud upstanders.
Hello, I'm Heinz Wartsky, and I was born in Germany. And I'm here that we are celebrating all the people who have helped us, and because I survived because of people who helped me in Italy. You know, we were able to escape, to leave Germany, and be ended up in Italy, and many Italians helped us survive. And that is why I think it's important that people who are involved now or were involved before in helping people survive. And that's certainly to be applauded and to be honored.
My name is Suzanne Dubiecki-Cohn. I was born in Poland and survived as a hidden child. How does one describe 3 years of a life in hiding in 30 seconds? After escaping the Kobrin ghetto, my parents, siblings, and I were hidden in attics, cellars, and under floorboards. And for 3 years, a remarkable Christian family, the Leshkovich, Maciejewski, and Savitsky family, risked their lives daily to save ours. But as if in defiance of Hitler, we triumphed and survived. From Poland to a DP camp in Germany, to Australia, and to my America, my country, not by birth, but by choice. I am free to live with my beloved husband, Norman, and have our 5 wonderful children and 10 extraordinary grandchildren with us. God bless America. I applaud upstanders.
So Rob, for us, I'm going to start, and I just want to say how much of an honor it is to meet you, and that you are so vocal in your cause to making sure that my grandfather's rescue mission is remembered. For us, that's wonderful, because it's something that we've dedicated ourselves to doing as well, and it's such a rare privilege to meet somebody, a direct survivor. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for doing this, because for me, it's, as my father said, these papers saved our lives, literally. And he always attributed it, without those papers, we would not be alive, we would not have survived the war. Because everyone else in my family that got caught up, none of them survived.
So how many children do you have? If because we're familiar with the personal details of your life.
Well, first of all, I've been married since 1963, so that's a few years. I'm probably longer than, so I've been married well over 50 years. I have 3 children, 1 boy, 2 girls. They are unusual for a survivor, or even for, my situation. 2 of them live in Naples, and 1 lives in a place called Cooper City, which is just near Fort Lauderdale. So in Florida. So we're a very close family. We get together often, and so forth. And then I have 4 grandchildren.
Have your grandchildren ever asked you about, are they the age that they begin to ask you about how you survived the war?
We talk about it, but not even my children know about it, but doesn't come up in the conversations. And the reality is, this goes back to, and they have copies of my father's story and everything like that. They understand what's going on, but there is a gap in that, we bring it up, but it's not, it's not a major issue for them. And part of it is that even for us, it wasn't, when we came to the United States, we didn't really talk about it, until many years afterwards. We wanted to start a new life. That's my parents' approach. And that became our primary focus.
Our grandfather is credited, along with his friend George Montello, as saving thousands of lives during the Holocaust. The rescue mission took place from about 1942 till the end of the war. We would find it very interesting to know just how your family received the paper and the mechanics behind that.
Well, the background is, my father was on what we call the Palestine list. These were Jews that were recognized that if the British would take us, the Germans would let us go to Palestine. So a friend of his had been able to get the papers, but he was in Amsterdam, and my father found out about it. And this is before, in the spring, or even maybe at the end of 42, beginning of 1943, that he found out what was needed, got those papers, and sent them to, I believe, the consulate at that point. The papers were actually dated, the certificate of citizenship was dated in March of 1943. We didn't get them right away, because they were sent to the Jewish community in Amsterdam, and by that time that had been disbanded. So my father didn't get the papers until we came back. We first went in June 1943 we went to a place called Westerbork. And we were there for 3 months. And then when we came back in September 1943, we were able to get the papers. So there was a 6-month lag between the time the papers were issued until we got them. So I don't know what the mechanics specifically were, but apparently there was communication. I know between Switzerland and Holland, even during the war.
Judy Cohen at the Museum for Human Rights estimated that about 10,000 people, at least, according to her estimate, were saved by the Castellanos-Mantello documents. But yet very little is known about my grandfather. And this is common to a lot of the righteous among the nations, not to complain, but this is very common to a lot of the righteous. You mentioned that you have tried to impress this fact to audiences, that the scope of the rescue that you are part of. Can you tell us a little bit about about how you have, when you speak, you try to impress on people the size of the Castellanos rescue?
Well, I didn't know the exact number. I knew there were thousands. When I talk to school groups, and primarily we're talking to what we call our middle school, and often I would talk to the whole school at different periods. And I stress the fact that these papers saved our lives, and that this was an unusual circumstance without that. And the scope of it, I didn't know myself what the scope was, okay? And so I think that's part of it. Also, your father's name is not on the paper. If you look at mine, his name is not on the document per se. That was one of my questions. I mean, it was like the first secretary too, or with Mantello. It was his name on the documents. And I don't know, I was going to ask how many people were in that situation where your grandfather's name was not on the document. It was rather his friend.
As far as we know from the research that we've done, in 1942, when they actually started the mass production of these documents, I think they produced 13,000, around thereabouts, 13,000 documents. And so what they did is at the Salvadoran consulate in Geneva, they set up in the basement of the building, they set up like a little factory of documents. So basically, there would be 5 or 6 people typing out documents feverishly. So my grandfather had made George Mantello and had authorized him to sign the papers. So they were authorized by the Salvadoran government through my grandfather. Yeah. Even though the Salvadoran government at first didn't know anything about it. The mission was it had to be so fast. These documents had to be printed out so fast that Mantello's signature went on it. And, that was the only signature that went on it. But they were authorized by my grandfather and thereby the Salvadoran government. They would keep the original, and they had a photostat machine, and then they would send out the photostat. So the document that you have in your possession is probably the photostat of the original document. In 2005, 1,300 of these documents were found in a suitcase in Switzerland in a dusty basement somewhere. So those are the documents that now reside at the U.S. Holocaust Museum.
So the vast majority were signed by Mr. Mantello also because he was the distributor in chief of the document. The idea came from my grandfather and Mr. Mantello, who were trying to save Mr. Mantello's brother. So then when they saw that it worked for him, they said, oh, well, this might be a great thing to reproduce. And there are those specimens signed by my grandfather because this was one of the things Yad Vashem needed to find, because until we found documents signed by my grandfather, it could have been argued that maybe Mr. Mantello was doing this on his own, but then they found various documents also signed by my grandfather. But most of them are signed and distributed by Mr. Mantello, who through his networks distributed the document, in the Jewish community. Some of the survivors who received the papers don't know who requested them. Do you know specifically the person who requested your paper? And how do you know that your father or your family didn't purchase the document?
With what? No, we did not purchase it. Okay. We had to supply the photos, first of all. This document originated out of Switzerland. My father found out from a friend of his who was able to obtain the documents, and he gave my father the information to contact. So we know for a fact that he did not pay for them. He submitted the papers through the agent. I believe he went through the agency in Switzerland and had it sent the documents there, because that was his contact. And we were getting correspondence from them.
There have been comparisons made of our grandfather, comparing him to the likes of Raoul Wallenberg. That's quite a comparison. I mean, Raoul Wallenberg saved thousands and thousands of lives. How would you compare or distinguish the rescue mission of our grandfather to other rescue missions that you're aware of?
The comparable one is Mendes, the Portuguese consul in France, who I think had a similar number. And actually, there's a street named after him in Bayonne, France. And he did the same thing. He gave out Portuguese papers, similar type of process.
Can you tell us of an example at which the document was actually used? Maybe somebody looked at it, or an anecdote that you remember from your father saying, oh, we used a document at this point and it was a critical moment, etc., something like that?
The timeline was that my father got the documents in September 1943 when we were allowed to go back to Amsterdam at the request of his company, because he was doing defense-related work for the Germans. His company was, and he was a senior engineer for a chemical engineer who had helped in developing this process for recycling batteries that they could use, the Germans could use. And in fact, they set up a plant in Westerbork, the transit camp, and he would travel back and forth between Amsterdam and Westerbork even after we were released and sent back. When we got back to Amsterdam, we got these papers. We were considered foreigners rather than Jews. We had more freedom to travel within Amsterdam. We were not subject to the same restrictions. Also, when we were in the final roundup in September 1944, we ended up again going to Westerbork, which is the transit camp. And from there, we went to Theresienstadt, which is where the foreigners were, where they interned the foreigners, rather than going to Bergen-Belsen and so forth. In October of 1944, were the last roundups from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the only death camp still in operation at that point. And everyone was concerned to be on that last. My father knew what was happening, and he thought we were going to be rounded up as well. And what happened actually was that none of the foreigners were deported to Auschwitz at that time. Then a third step, when we were liberated by the Russians, we eventually, at the end of May, we were turned over to the Americans and ended up in DP camp temporarily. And even there, when my father showed him our papers with the citizenship, the American person in charge said, well, you're an American, and allowed us to go into town, gave us freedom. Even in the DP camp, we were not stuck in the DP camp. So there were 3 instances where it helped us.
One of the things we always try to, we always ask of any direct survivor is, if my grandfather, Colonel Castellanos, was speaking to you right now, what would you say to him?
The bottom line is, if it weren't for him, we would not be alive. That's the bottom line. And thank him for that. You have to understand, at the time in 1940, when Holland was invaded, we had 15, there was a total of 15 family members there. My brother, myself, and my parents were the only survivors. We would not have survived without those papers, without these citizenship papers from El Salvador.
And Robert, it's been such an incredible pleasure for us to meet someone who survived the Holocaust, especially through the Castellanos Rescue Mission. These opportunities are very far and few between, so we really thank you for your time.
The only thing that I regret is that you didn't have a chance to talk to my brother, because he was a teenager. And he would have enjoyed talking to you also.
Well, we want to also thank the Holocaust Museum and the Cohen Center for this great opportunity. It's been for us a great meeting of really, for us, many of the answers you've given us are missing links, we might say, to our research. For instance, the piece about you being classified as an American, for us, is incredibly meaningful to hear from a survivor. So we really owe the Holocaust Museum and the Cohen Education Center a lot, and we really appreciate everyone there and Susan for their efforts in making this possible, as we have traveled the world trying to tell the story of not only my grandfather, but the other righteous among the nations. So thank you to you and to Susan and to the entire Nosen family and David as well.
so much.
Studies have proven that by helping students to develop a greater understanding of the Holocaust and its impact, they can also better recognize the dangers of anti-Semitism and discrimination, and the importance of standing up for others and for stopping something similar from happening again. Research also suggests that students with Holocaust education have greater empathy and ability to work cooperatively with people of diverse backgrounds. One of the most powerful teaching methods is storytelling. That's why we share stories like the one you heard today about the impact of the courage of an upstander like Colonel Castellanos. Thank you for joining us in bringing these stories to students all across Southwest Florida.